Any sense in worrying about the past. That's somebody else's business now.
Human beings have been interested in the future as long as there have been human beings. I mean, I couldn't imagine being a human being and not being interested in the future, if only because you're going to die, for God's sakes.
Literally, I did not see myself in the future because I wasn't there. As a black, I wasn't there. As a female,
When I was a child, everyone got in school this newspaper called The Weekly Reader. It was a newspaper for children. It was still an era of the 50s where children were expected to know how to read. I would have to say that my entire visual notion of the future was created by The Weekly Reader. And that is absolutely how someone my age thought the future would look.
Highways and freeways and arteries going up and over and under and across and ha la la. And I thought it was wonderful because when I was a child, there weren't even paved roads. They were gravel.
It appeared in many of the future images that people were trying to get away from the world, go out into outer space, go replace people with robots.
Cars were on these electric roads and sidewalks were electric. If you think about it, if the future was like they said it was going to be, no one would have any muscle mass because everything was going to be done for us.
I had imaginations about poverty being move in that dimension.
There was no humor whatsoever in the future. There was no silliness. There was no frivolity. There was no manic depression.
I was very trusting. I just assumed, okay, if you say so, that I guess that's the way it's going to be, you know.
My mother saw the invention of the automobile, the electric light, the airplane, television. She saw men walk on the moon. This was a woman who was born before there was electricity or automobiles. And it's difficult for me to think that people now
have laid the foundation for most of what is good in life today, with the promise of more tomorrow.
We all believed in progress, you see, naturally. What was America about if it wasn't about progress?
Results of radiographing the entire anatomy are startling to the layman. Nothing is hidden from the searching scrutiny of popular science.
So many of the technologies truly seem to be revolutionizing life. So there was this assumption that today's change was nice, but tomorrow it would even change more and progress would inexorably roll forward.
For convenience in dialing, the letters go around the dial in alphabetical order, and the numbers are in numerical order, from 1 to 9 and 0.
Everybody now, my age, see, I'm 67 years old, and you hear hearing old folks lie about, sure wish we could get back to the good old days. Let me tell you, the only thing good about the good old days was they left.
When dialing, notice that I brought my finger around until it firmly touched the finger stop. And now I remove my finger and let the dial go back by itself.
The 20th century came in with enormous optimism, great faith, great belief in the future. Because of these wonderful technological advances, there were two things: the miracle of technology and the ideal of social welfare. And they just thought one was going to be achieved through the other.
This is your world today, but let me show you the world of tomorrow.
Man will again seek new horizons. He will build super highways on which he may travel 250 miles per hour. He will build express bridges over lakes, mountains, plains. He may travel from America to Europe in a matter of minutes instead of hours. I picture man's horizon overreaching the seas and continents of this planet. I dream of the time when man will cry in some distant tomorrow, on to Jupiter.
They are always promising things that never come along. I remember a comic strip, Buck Rogers, and he had one of the greatest inventions there has ever not been. He had this round thing on his back about the size of a plate, but thicker, and it would enable him to jump 20 or 30 feet. Not, I mean, he couldn't fly with it, but I mean, just being able to jump 20 or 30 feet, and I've been waiting for that. I would love to have that.
That was another thing I remember. You could go into a little vacuum thing, and then you would be disintegrated, and you'd go to Paris, and you'd be like that. Because I'm very interested in instant gratification.
Well, case in point, next week I have to go to Baltimore. And I would love to just be able to do this, close the little plastic thing over me, and be in Baltimore. I would love that, to be able to travel like that. And that was a promise that they had made, that we would be able to teleport ourselves. And they have not come through with that. And that's a pisser.
I wanted to go everywhere in monorails. I wanted to be able to go to school in a monorail, and I thought it was going to happen. If you've ever been on a monorail, the surprising thing for me is they're bumpy. It's weird. Why are they bumpy? You would think that that smooth mono track, it would be nice, smooth ride, but you know the monorail at Disneyland? It's like this.
I really wanted undersea cities. I really wanted cities to exist under the ocean, and maybe a city on the moon. I wanted to experience weightlessness.
I remember seeing these Popular Mechanics shorts when I was a kid that really made the future exciting because they would be pushing some kind of technology like, you know, you could put this jacket on and it will shave you while it does your taxes. You know, like, wow, the future's going to be great.
Hi, Fred. How's the old golf game? Don't ask.
Regularly, at five-year intervals, somebody comes up with a demonstration of a person sitting in front of a screen talking to somebody they can see. Well, what's the advantage of seeing anybody at the other end of a telephone?
I always forget to shut that thing off.
It's all right with me.
Telephone TV, with callers able to see as well as hear, may soon be a recognized reality.
Do you really want to answer the phone in the morning and have somebody see what you actually look like? With a regular phone, you can say, I'm too tired to come into work today, too sick. Can't do that with a picture phone.
Let me talk to him. Listen, Ming. If you harm Dale Arden, I'll come there and kill you with my bare hands.
I am not interested or disturbed with the ravings of a madman.
I think it's more interesting how many things they never predicted. They never realized that there'd be so many lawyers. They never realized how much we'd litigate. You know, they never realized that a woman would get hot coffee at McDonald's, spill it on herself, and win a suit for the coffee being too hot. I mean, the woman should have been, it's caveat emptor. She's going through the drive-thru. The boy is wearing asbestos mittens. What does that tell you?
This is the part of the future that no one takes into account. All the popular science and popular mechanics magazines and the Walt Disneys of the world, et cetera, that predicted this wonderful monorail world where everything whirled around and people were always moving. No one ever stayed in one place for even 5 seconds. It was all how you get from someplace to someplace. You never went anywhere. You were just going there. But they didn't take into account how stupid people are going to be. That America's greatest natural resource still to this day is the moron.
Where shall I drop you? Drop us off at Mount Vernon? Mount Vernon.
Perhaps the technology that most symbolized the emerging 20th century was technology of flight. There was this utopian expectation that a ground-based civilization would become an aerial-based civilization.
In New York, as across the country, modern Americans prepare to take to the skies. As easy as a car to operate, this may be the way the missus goes a-shopping in the future.
Flight has definitely revolutionized our world, but not the way we thought it might. When I was growing up, I remember a superhero who flew around in an autogyro. How futuristic he flew.
I remember the last issue of Collier's magazine, a magazine that was once very popular, had a man standing on a platform about 6 feet in diameter, and he held onto the rails, and there was a propeller underneath it. And he could go out in the morning, get on this thing, and power himself downtown to his office, land on the roof, and go downstairs. Still waiting for that.
Flying cars. I remember a car that was designed, and I saw lots of footage and publicity about, in which you remove the wings from the trunk, you attach them, it takes about 15 minutes, and you have a small, light airplane.
You gas up just like any other jalopy, 16 miles to the gallon in the air, 30 on the road. You land, wheel into your hangar, unscrew the propeller, and shed your wings. And presto, it's an automobile.
When you have all these cars flying through the air, because we're no longer limited, according to the future, to the highway, no one takes into account the fact that we have yet to even master the highway. That we have people that are running you off the road, we have drunks down there, and when they would talk about the transportation, it would just be the transportation in the future, not the fool in the air.
And if you can imagine, during rush hour, 10,000 of these sort of colliding into each other, you know, bang, 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 coming to ground, it looked like a pile of dead bees.
I thought by this time I'd have my own pack on my back, and zoom, I think I'll go to school. Zoom, you know. Technology exists, and it does. You've seen those experimental things, mostly on Learning Channel or A&E between Nazi promotions, you know.
The big thing was, always was the personal rocket pad. They didn't call it rocket pad, it was just personal transportation. Some of them had, like, chopper propellers on them. Some of them just had, like, a Rocket Man pack. And I don't know, for a while there, everybody was obsessed with having their own backpack and flying around. Imagine what that would be like in Manhattan.
Just imagine the New York of 1980, when everyone has a number instead of a name, and the government tells you whom you should marry. Just imagine 1980.
Transportation is really at the heart of most of these visions. And that's because it was new. We were just out of the horse and buggy age. Everyone was enamored with speed. These were romantic visions. They always had great skyscrapers, larger than anything that was known at the time, very often in clusters, joined by bridges. Below the buildings, you had great crisscrossing avenues. You would have trains on one level, commercial traffic on another, cars on another, and of course, the air traffic. The pictures were always full of little flying things in the sky. You really had to understand almost instantly that this traffic would be uncontrollable and that it was a dream.
Get out of there! Don't you know you can only park there 3 minutes?
All right.
I love those old depictions of the cities of tomorrow in those old movies, Metropolis and Just Imagine and that kind of thing. What I always find amazing is they have these gigantic buildings, the buildings that are the size of small cities now, and I always wonder, what are those interior rooms like? You know, it's got to be pretty dark in there.
The teens and the 20s and the beginning of the 30s was the dream world period. My memory of Metropolis is the sets. The sets showed a city much higher and much more grand and much more crowded than it ever got to be in reality. After all, Metropolis is a German film. The whole situation in Europe was such that they dreamt about America and the future skyscrapers getting bigger and bigger in America.
New York's midtown skyline
already futuristic with its towering spires, now has a biggest big brother, the 102-story Empire State Building. 1/4 of a mile straight up.
We all felt, oh, the city's going to get taller and taller and taller. As Corbusier said, the only thing that's wrong with New York, the buildings are not tall enough. See, it was just these little stumpy buildings like the Empire State Building. They should be higher. Then, of course, Le Corbusier wanted to tear down Paris and rebuild it with nice skyscrapers everywhere.
The idea was to rip out 2 square miles of Paris, right in the heart of the city, and to build 16 60-story towers. And the philosophy behind it was that everybody would have light, air, sunshine.
We really believed, you see, that architecture could save the world. There were books written about how glass would make you a better man. In a glass building, they had a moral feeling about the morality of building in the glass.
You can see how appealing this vision could be in a very abstract way, but of course in completely human terms, it couldn't possibly work.
The windows must be horizontal, not like nice, good American windows, heavens no, but horizontal so you could see out, see? One line of horizon. And that was considered a step toward true health and good living.
There are places, I'm sure, where there is like a 2 square block area somewhere in the United States that probably comes pretty damn close to looking like that. But what they don't show is 2 blocks farther out from there, where the little strip mall is, with the Thai restaurant, the bail bondsman, and the dry cleaner all jammed into the little corner with no parking.
Office buildings will combine unique parking and elevator services. From his private parking space, Father will probably have to walk to his desk. When mother and son arrive at the shopping center, they enter a massive cylinder, and their parking space literally comes to them. Safely above vehicular traffic, moving sidewalks make window shopping effortless.
I think one of the concepts that seized people's imaginations was that cities themselves would become like machines. Machines for living. You never had to go out in the open air. Tunnels took you everywhere, or bridges took you everywhere. In the city, things were so glassy and shiny and bright, it was unbearable.
This is a town of the future. The main departure is to have its roads at roof level, leaving the entire ground space free for pedestrians.
I moved to New York when I was a teenager, when I was 18 years old. I didn't come here because I heard how clean it was. So things like cleanliness, these type of things, which are American obsessions, and always also a notion of the future will be cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, you know, more and more germ-free in every respect, you know, both actually of literally germs and symbolically germs.
Spring cleaning time for the garden metropolis of tomorrow. The World's Fair is busy getting its famed model of Democracy all set for the grand opening. And here we are at a special preview of that magic metropolis. Suspended in space inside the perisphere, spectators circle the vision of the future. How neat, how spotless everything looks in every woman's dream city.
Soaring back into 1939, we look down on the world of tomorrow, New York's World's Fair.
In 1939 came the World's Fair. I remember that vividly. You went and you thought, God, it's the future. It is the future. It was also shiny. It was also sharp. I mean, this way, sharp, you know. It was also dramatic. It was also enormously, I guess, optimistic.
Here, literally, is the greatest show on earth. This year, bigger and better than ever. And through these gates come visitors from all over the world. On every side is the beautiful and the strange.
The 1939 World's Fair was so important because it came during the Depression. To have a World's Fair at that time was a kind of act of
hope. It was a secular society's equivalent of a prayer that somehow, despite the fact that American civilization seemed to be collapsing and war was taking over the whole world, there was going to be a future. That was the assumption of the World's Fair, and this is what it would look like.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, with a great deal of pride and pleasure, I present to you Electro, the Westinghouse Moto Man. And here he comes, ladies and gentlemen, walking up to greet you under his own power.
That's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen.
Boy, what a guard that guy'd make on my football team.
I have a memory of going on the walking sidewalk and going around the model exhibit, which had superhighways,
that
ramps
was
and freeways. Yes.
What was it, Superama, something like that?
Tell you the truth, I remember the food at the 1939 World's Fair better than I remember the inventions.
For the real key to what the future holds for us, look to the exhibits of industry and trade, the fascinating new materials that are being introduced, the advances in technology, the authentic forecasts of life as we will come to know it.
It was every corporation's emphatic desire to create a market for its products. They knew what kind of America they wanted, and they saw to it that they got it. And the World's Fair was the public promotion of this vision.
One can't help marveling at all the new things they're inventing every day.
A company can't stand still under the American system of private enterprise. It has two ways to go, back or forward. If it can make better products than the other fellow, it moves ahead. If it can't, the other fellow gets the business. But in either case, the public benefits.
The largest exhibit of its kind in the world is the Futurama. 5 million people saw it at the New York World's Fair. The idea of the Futurama is the mechanized world of tomorrow, a preview of the cities of the future. Thousands of model cars belonging to model workmen streak down the model roads. It's speed and still more speed, and everything's hunky-dory.
Back at the 1939 World's Fair, when GM had its exposition with highways showing how it would make life a lot easier, I suspect that one of the people who went to that was a young fellow about my age named Ralph Nader. And he took a look at those highways, and he saw something that they didn't see.
Well, as I recall as a young child, the 39 World's Fair was a kind of science technological fiction, where the major companies, led by General Motors, painted a future over the next 50, 70 years that never has materialized. It was going to be totally congenial to people's needs in terms of no indication of pollution, no indication of distortion of land use planning, no indication of congestion, bumper-to-bumper traffic, no indication of the carnage on the highway. It was just bright and shiny and motor vehicle and highway all the way.
This, the city of 1960, is a place in which man may realize the fulfillment of his dreams, a place suited to the living of the fuller, richer life which will be our heritage from science and research in the world of tomorrow.
People were quite willing to buy that. It was a kind of optimism that was very, very useful at that particular moment. I bought everything that the fair had to sell.
I wonder if the years ahead will be as bright as this.
We haven't seen anything yet, darling. Why, all this is merely a sample of the real world of tomorrow.
What's the last line in Hemingway's book? Isn't it pretty to think so, he said.
We were all great utopians in those days. Unfortunately, a man named Hitler came along and took our utopia away, made his utopia out of it.
Plunged into the darkness of war that same year, the legacy of the 1939 World's Fair seemed lost forever. The progress displayed here was to be shelved in favor of the war machine.
All of those visions of a future had to be put on hold as the nation girded for war. And so for 5, 6 years, the future was something one could read about in the advertisements of the large corporations, saying things like, Right now, there's important work to be done, but after the war, this sort of material vision of the future will be there for everybody.
I can remember all during the war years, we wanted a lamp. You couldn't buy a lamp. At the end of the war, General Electric made a set of lamps. A floor lamp, a table lamp, and a desk lamp. And everybody in America, we'd waited for years. We bought that lamp set for $29.95.
The American people, accepting discomfort as a wartime necessity, consoled themselves with rosy dreams of their post-war homes. Before them, architects dangled marvelous fabrications of plexiglass and plywood, flooded with sunlight, air-conditioned and gleamingly efficient, all to be theirs at a nominal price when peace should come.
It's very difficult during the Depression to start a new household. And then came World War II. Finally, when the war ends in 1945, there's a pent-up desire to start households, start families, to get a home.
So, Mr. Fuller, why a roundhouse?
Why not? The only reason houses have been rectangular all these years is that is all it could do with the materials we had. Now, with modern materials and technology, we can apply to houses the same efficiency of engineering that we apply to suspension bridges and airplanes.
Every magazine had homes of the future. And then a picture of a lady sitting there with her children, all warm and lovely, with a glass wall, of course, and perfectly happy. Everything was electric. You push button that. Fit the American dream at the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, the all-glass bathroom of tomorrow made possible by popular science today, where mirror, walls, and every unshadowed corner is brilliant with indirect built-in light.
It's very uncomfortable in the future. There is too much chrome. This kind of stuff that I grew up with in my house, there was too much chrome. It was all perfect. Things don't get dirty.
All curves and plastic. Monsanto's House of the Future is open to the public at Disneyland. The four-wing plastic shell makes a snug and solid five-room dwelling designed for a family of four. A family food center to store atomically irradiated food. A work surface that includes a combination supersonic dishwasher and storage unit.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with what this house looks like, the Monsanto House of the Future. Basically, I mean, in my child's notion of this, I believed houses would be on stems.
They had that, what do you call that thing?
This is the kitchen of tomorrow, a press-button dream coming true for Mrs. Housewife. All sorts of wonders are hers at the push of a button, from refrigerator doors to countertops built for big gals or little gals.
The home of tomorrow always has a housewife prominently featured, operating a new high-tech kitchen. But no one ever thought that maybe a male would be cooking the meal, or maybe they'd all be eating out, or maybe it'd be a single-person household.
But this was a kitchen like none I've seen. Put a card in the slot, and onto the screen pops a picture of just how your dish will look, plus all the ingredients you need to cook.
Hello, yes, this is Mary. How are you? Bye.
They say your kitchen dazzles every eye.
No need for the bride to feel tragic. The rest is push-button magic.
A brand new sink, a built-in oven, a new refrigerator, and a phone, a kitchen phone.
So whether you bake or broil or stew, the Frigidaire kitchen does it all for you.
During the Depression years, especially for women, life was very hard. So these were labor-saving devices. I mean, the picture of, machines that washed your clothes.
You can make fun of that
dishes.
now.
Yeah.
You make fun of those old ads where you see a woman looking with adoration at her washing machine. But it was no fun not to have it.
I gotta go, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I'll call you later.
You know, they always say automation will give you hours, weeks, months of leisure. Ha ha, promises, promises.
Tick tock, I'm free to have fun around the clock.
The TV advertising I remember then about the future was certainly always about the housewife, was something that was going to make her life easier and more time for leisure activities, basically. In a dress, overly dressed in the kitchen always seemed to be part of it. Like who would cook dinner in a prom dress? But it seemed like that was my memory of it. But a lot of times it was some magic man appearing with some cleaning thing, like Mr., I don't know, Mr. Clean or some, and it was always like softcore porno, really, because the housewife was home alone, per usual, with her kids, and some studdish man would appear magically with a product for her. Well, even then, I knew that it was some sort of sexual undertow there.
You know, all the things that were proposed that were going to be this kind of utopia, this, were things that were meant always to aid the housewife. There would never be a notion that they would aid a man, because men didn't do this kind of work.
Mike, how about chicken salad? Cheese omelet?
Cheeseburger, some French fries, and a nice cold bottle of beer.
I'll see.
I never saw in my whole childhood a man wash a dish. I would have been absolutely shocked to see such a thing. It would have been flabbergasting to me. So that all things were invented with the idea that the housewife's lot would be an easier one.
As for life in the space age, the appliance industry will continue its lifelong love affair with you, the American homemaker.
And we were subjected to movies in school, promotional films from corporations that would show you the things of the future, because by the time this thing would be invented, you, who are now, say, a 9-year-old girl, would be a housewife.
This thing about women getting actually out of the kitchen and into the stream of work, actually going to work in places of business, this was not even a thought in anyone's head.
Whether it was prehistoric times or 2005, whatever, which seemed a long way into the future for us, there was still, Mrs. somebody sweeping the cave, sweeping the house, or having the robot sweep the house. But she was always the same, the housewife, and the husband always went off to his job, and everything was always just the same socially. It's just the technology that changed.
Split-second lunches, color-keyed disposable dishes, all part of the instant society of tomorrow. A society rich in leisure and taken for granted comfort.
I remember the kitchens of tomorrow, but we never had the sense of progress that these tasks would be either shared or they would be done and free everyone. But the woman somehow had to push the button to the electric thing and had to open the woman was still there, a slave to these things, even though she had less physical work to do. She had to push so many buttons, it was probably easier just to vacuum and wash the dishes herself.
We had, for instance, a push-button car. It was meant for women, I'm sure. I remember a little piece of the ad showing a woman's hand pressing the buttons, and at least the subtext of this was you wouldn't break your nails. And of course, this was easier for women than the hard work of shifting a car. My mother loved this car, and I remember her saying to her friends, look, you just push this button, you don't have to do this. This was huge progress.
Attention all motorists, here's a car worth looking into. It's an experimental job, ideas of which you'll probably see in standard cars of the future. For example, if it rains, the first drop will automatically close the top.
The automobile was more than just a piece of technology. It was liberation and freedom. You could go places. I mean, I can remember we had an automobile, and we could go from New York to New Jersey. We could travel 50 miles. I mean, this was, people didn't travel.
It was the leading indicator of status in this country. You were a Buick family or a Plymouth family or, I suppose, a Cadillac family. We didn't know any. And so cars were a very big deal. And cars, the unveiling of the, 1959 cars, which also covered by the Weekly Reader, would be a very big thing. You were dying to see what the car looked like. It looked different every year.
The Sabre, thrusting toward tomorrow. This is the mood of the Motorama.
They had this cheesy auto queen all the time. And she would have to sit on this car that would like revolve, and you could tell she might puke any minute from revolving all day with families gawking at her and like dad leching her, mom wishing she looked like her, and the children wishing they could get the car and cause an accident.
In years to come, will Americans be riding in automobiles that have no wheels? Could be, for here at the Rotunda in Dearborn, Michigan, Ford Motor Company demonstrates the first full-scale lever car,
A vehicle that slides along on nothing more than a film of air. With the car kept on its circular highway by an anchor bar, let's watch the jet-propelled air-levitated vehicle in action. If this doesn't turn out to be the car of the future, you can be sure industrial research will come up with something just as exciting.
Face it, who really thinks about the future? It's teenage boys. That's what this is all about. Teenage boys who can't get dates, and they feel bad about it. And what do? They escape into the future.
Firebird 2 to Control Tower. We are about to take off on the highway of tomorrow. Stand by.
Our dreams will come true.
It was a realm for visual imagination. In other words, car designers, when you look at those cars, you know, there's certainly a lovely quality of fantasy about them. You know, that's the upside of little boyness, I think. You know, it's a dream of a little boy. Those fins, you know, all that chrome. You know, I love that stuff. I loved it then. And that's a good boyish invention, I think. Chrome.
Firebird 3, an experiment for tomorrow.
The Firebird 3 was this huge icon of my childhood. I really wanted that car. I loved the idea of the bubble top. But if you've ever actually sat in one of those cars, they're really hot. The bubble top is not something that you want. You think you want it, but you really don't.
The Firebird series at General Motors, Harley Earl was the styling chief. And he said, I want something that's going to grab their attention like a whore walking down the street, and that's where it came from. They designed this outrageous show car.
Squeeze your sonic key, and sound waves open the door. This certainly is the future.
They all had this teardrop shape, and they can go really fast, and the highways were automatic. And they always showed, like, the family in the car, but they're all facing each other, and the car's driving itself, and they're playing a game, and they're all smiling, and they're all white.
Roger, Firebird 2. Move to electronic control strip in center lane. You're now under automatic control. Hands-off steering.
You had driverless positioning of the occupants because you were going to go on these automated highways. So the steering posts or the steering devices would fold out of the way or fold into the center console or something.
Ah, this is the life. Safe, cool, comfortable. Mind if I smoke a cigar?
Oh, not with this wonderful air conditioning.
Hey, do you want some ice cream or a cool drink?
Orange juice, please.
You'll notice the highway of the future, there's always huge gaps between the cars, and there were no crowds anywhere. So, which means that birth control must have been a big thing in the future, but it was never told to us.
Well, the motor vehicle was associated with mobility, obviously freedom, a carefree attitude. It's all, you know, like a fantasy land.
On entering the city, the family separates. Father to his office, mother and son to the shopping center.
Back in the 50s, work was already being envisioned for traffic which would be automatically controlled. The only way to achieve high-speed traffic with any volume would be with removing the control from the driver. 50 years later, it still hasn't happened, but work is still in progress.
Highway and automotive design will move forward together. First, we'll have the more efficient gas turbine car, then the speedier jet, the inexhaustible atom, and possibly the sun-powered electro-suspension car, which needs no wheels.
It was viewed like a circus by people. I don't know whether they necessarily believed that all these great things without any side effects was going to be theirs in 10, 20, 30 years, but the auto companies certainly implied that. But somehow they never had a deadline. They never had a schedule. There was no calendar. It was like a Buck Rogers display. Sometime in the future, it will occur.
We saw some luscious styles today of new cars at your company.
And I'm sure the other companies in their styling divisions are also creating these wonderful things for the future. But always, it seems to be, if I may say so, in the future. When does that future get here for us, the customers?
Well, the customer is the one who decides when the future gets here. We have found that the customer does not take too readily to a radical design change. He would much rather go through an evolutionary stage, so therefore, we can't be too advanced in the car that we put on the road, say, next model year. We have to build up to it gradually.
Such visionary ideas, which today seem sheer fantasy, will be commonplace to future generations. There will be miles of tubular highways, air-conditioned routes across hot desert wastelands. These giant arteries will link together all nations and help create a better understanding among the peoples of the world. As in the past, the highway will continue to play a vital role in the progress of civilization. It will be our magic carpet to new hopes, new dreams, and a better way of life for the future.
We were unbelievably innocent. I cannot possibly convey how innocent we were captive children. I mean, I'm sure there were children who weren't, probably, you know, Elizabeth Taylor's children, but the average child. Of course, in the center of this endless optimism and faith and belief in science, we were pretty much all terror-stricken at the notion of a nuclear war.
I thought nuclear war was going to happen the next day. Every day I thought it was a possibility.
We had drills regularly, surprise ones when the enemy was no warning. They were over 125th Street. For some reason, they got through.
Literally, we had to hide under the desk. And I think every day at 1 o'clock, the siren went off. And I think maybe that still happens in Baltimore. I don't know.
It's a bomb. Duck and cover.
We had consistently air raid drills, sitting under your desk with your hands over your head.
We would go down to the basement of our school and get on our knees against the wall and pray. And I always wondered, like, how is this going to protect us from a bomb?
There was clearly in Washington a serious belief that the way to ward off the ill effects of a nuclear attack were a pair of 7-year-old hands on top of your head.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do.
And I can remember my mother driving me up to this particular boarding school in Maine. And we didn't talk about much. It was a long drive, 3 or 4 hours. And I got there, and the principal said, I see from your report card that you're failing almost everything in school. What's the problem? Why aren't you doing well? And I hadn't even been thinking about this. Just out of me came this statement. I said, well, since they have invented the hydrogen bomb, there is no future. Not only will all the Beethoven, all of his symphonies disappear forever, but anything I might do would have little effect. It wouldn't exist in the face of that. And the principal took a long pause and he said, well, that's what they said when they invented the crossbow. You know, and I knew there was a difference in the hydrogen bomb and the crossbow, but I was too intimidated to tell him.
You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn.
The Cold War was very scary. We definitely had that sense of maybe there won't be a future.
I grew up in Chicago, so it wasn't quite as frightening in Chicago as it was on the East Coast or the West Coast, you know, because we would have gotten more warning than New York would have gotten.
These, the characters in this drama of survival under the A-bomb. Children at play, unaware of approaching disaster.
I begged on my hands and knees my parents to build a fallout shelter. I couldn't believe that they were being so irresponsible. You know, we were going to be attacked by the Russians, and we were going to be the only ones dead.
The family room of tomorrow. National Civil Defense Deputy Director John Patterson unveils a fallout shelter in Chicago, which can double as an extra room in the house.
The 1963 Cuban Missile Crisis, I was at the Yale Drama School. I called home. I said, Pop, canned foods, potable water, potable. I kept on using that word because he was paying Yale tuition.
drinkable.
I took my survival into my own hands and put in the crawl space some cans of tuna fish and some jars of water, where I believe, well, they may want to burn up in a nuclear war, but I intend to survive. And when my parents moved from the house, they discovered these, you can imagine what kind of condition this jar of tap water was in.
Fred and the boys had already spent several evenings on the shelter, and now the walls were definitely taking shape.
We had a fallout shelter installed. I remember hearing all these things about how your neighbors would come kill you if you were the only one that had the fallout shelter. And my next door neighbors were named George and Martha, and their house was called Mount Vernon. I'm not making this up. And they were really nice neighbors, but the straightest people in the entire world. And I always pictured him with a shotgun slaughtering our family to get into our fallout shelter.
Yeah, with a little good planning and some advice, maybe I could build it myself. You know, we could put it over in the corner where the baby crib and that other stuff is.
Then we would go down to that fallout shelter, and I'd see these little, this is horrible, but I feel I'll share it with you. These little boxes if you had to, like, well, eliminate. And I thought, we all have to go to the bathroom with our family in these boxes and put chemicals on. I'd rather die. I'd rather go outside and have the Russians kill us than have to take a shit with my parents, if you really want to know the truth.
Today, there is no second best for family civil defense. The urgent need to prepare now against the threat of atomic warfare. Or will you, like a mannequin, just sit and wait?
The day that we had to put in, we all looked at it, and everybody just sort of, I don't know why. My parents were trying to do the best things for us. No one ever went down there again, ever.
Look, you can't live with something as devastating as the prospects of the atom bomb because you just go crazy. So you find ways of rationalizing it, put it in the back shelf. Don't talk about it radio. Yes, I know. Let's talk about something else. But it lingers.
There is no denying that since that moment, the shadow of the atom bomb has been across all our lives. All men of goodwill earnestly hope that a realistic control of atomic weapons can and will be achieved.
The administrations during the 50s very much wanted to shift the focus from the atom as a force of destruction to the atom for peace.
When they first started talking about atoms for peace, they said, we're going to give everybody this cheap energy. And I kept saying, well, they never gave us anything cheap before.
Nuclear explosives will be used within industry for the good of man exactly as chemical explosives are used, but at a substantially lesser cost, and can be used with complete safety to human life.
For quite a few years, we have tried to find ways to bend this power to useful purposes. Use nuclear explosives, like high explosives have been used, to find out the behavior. And we perform that explosion for peaceful purposes alone.
Nuclear explosions for the fast economic creation of mountain passes, harbors, and perhaps even a new canal across Panama.
As a boy, as well as being fearful of the bomb and lying underneath my pressed wood desk in North Ridgeville, Ohio, there was also also the promise that nuclear energy was the energy of the future, and that everything would be powered by atoms. You'd have nuclear dust busters, you'd have a nuclear car, a nuclear water heater, a washer dryer would all be nuclear.
The thing about nuclear energy was it was very mystifying because it could obliterate you or it could illuminate your house. You know, it could cure a disease or it could cause a disease. I mean, it was truly a magical, futuristic kind of thing.
For tunneling through mountains, this atomic reactor applying incredible heat literally melts the hard rock as it makes molehills out of mountains. Even your toothpaste may be a product of the atomic age.
I walked into my elementary classroom in 1946, and our teacher held the class for an hour telling us there'll be no more gas stations necessary, because you just put a little thingamajig of nuclear power in your car. You never have to fill the tank again, and you wouldn't have to have a furnace in your home because it would just be nuclear power.
I did a concept called the nucleon, which did in fact feature a detachable nuclear power pod.
The concept was every 10 years or so, you'd drive your nucleon into a local neighborhood nuclear recharging station, and they would change the uranium rods or something in the back, and off you'd drive for another decade.
And the nuclear pile was in the back, sort of in a pickup truck looking extension. I mean, if you can imagine a rear ender on this. Radioactive waste scattered over the freeway.
Could be just like a fender bender on a clover leaf of some interchange, and over 500,000 people would be killed when it goes off. Big mushroom cloud, and the helicopters out there. Film at 11.
Most of the 50s horror movies were these disasters to the earth, or horrible creatures like the Thing made of vegetable matter, all carrot. Remember him, James? It was all as a result of the abuse of nuclear power.
Scientists and engineers today are carefully working toward these goals with a series of nuclear excavation experiments designed to increase their knowledge and skills in this exciting new concept.
Radiation, mutations, the ants, remember those?
It is a deliberate, careful, scientific program.
Science out of control.
Mutant bugs and that kind of thing was appealing to me as a child, certainly.
Endless tomatoes and blobs that were, growing in a cancerous, they're like, devouring tumors.
These are just some possibilities.
The future was scary to me, their version of it. And when Sputnik went up, I remember that we all were on the lawn. And I don't know, my grandmother started screaming, there it is, and everybody ran out, and it was just an airplane.
Sputnik was, as I recall, the size of a basketball. And as soon as it went up, everybody in school had to start talking about being a scientist or studying science and math.
Soviet films of student groups tracking the satellite underscore the emphasis on science in Russian schools.
I guess they didn't tell the population that all the Nazi scientists came here after World War II and they didn't really need to train their own.
I knew basically that we raided the Germans and grabbed von Braun and these others, and they made their public relations. Von Braun was just all-American apple pie, lived in Alabama, with a banjo on my knee.
The primary purpose of the first moon trip will be to test the methods and equipment to be used on later voyages into deep space. We have provided a new type of spacesuit. Using gyros and 2 small rocket motors, the operator can tilt and move in any direction.
Will you be the Christopher Columbus of space travel, the first spaceman to land on the moon? Will you find a cold, dead world with no air, no water, only giant craters and jagged mountains?
The idea of space travel seems remote. I mean, my first science fiction experience was those Gene Autry series where they wore mop pails for helmets. Odor of Thunder, once shooter, with very bad special effects where the hill opens and you see the finger pushing the hill.
This faceplate is all there is between me and an absolute vacuum. If it suddenly popped out, my blood would literally boil.
I never was a big fan of science fiction or rocket movies, but the more seamless the special effects, the less I liked them. I like the cheap ones. Earth versus Flying Saucers, that was my favorite, when the saucer went right through the Washington Monument. I loved that. To me, that was an erotic moment as a child.
You never saw them eat, you never saw them poop, you never saw them pee, and God knows how they reproduced, because by the time you got out of the jumpsuit, you weren't in the mood anyway.
I mean, the original people on that particular rock with the poor monkey. You see him, was on him too, getting earthly. These 3 Gs, like a skating act. I always felt sorry for them. Why do you love Spain? The lady's face is 9 Gs on it. She's spinning.
Space was the kind of thought children thrilled to because you can't really think it. It's a thought that you can't genuinely form. And there's no thought more thrilling than that, especially to a child.
The spacemen of tomorrow, 7 astronauts of Project Mercury, experienced the eerie sensation of total weightlessness in special training flights. A preview of man's first space voyage.
I remember very vividly John Glenn's flight. That was the first kind of space thing I can recall. He was a huge hero. Huge hero. They instantly, within a day, renamed half the streets in my town after John Glenn. And I thought that was only appropriate. We expected to have heroes, and he looked like a hero. He looked like an American hero. At that time, he had blonde hair, he had blue eyes. You know, he was instantly on the cover of Life magazine with his space helmet on, you know, which looked exactly like the space helmets from the Weekly Reader. In other words, they really looked like that. You know, it was a big, giant, round thing with a glass window in front, and he had these eyes twinkling out and blonde hair. And, you know, he was probably chosen for his looks. That's the guy. It's the guy with the blonde hair. No one else could have been John Glenn.
I think Kennedy's death gave the space race momentum just because everybody at that point loved Kennedy and wanted to fulfill the dream that he'd given us. Once we'd reached the moon during the Nixon administration, Spiro Agnew said something like, "Now on to Mars." And everyone just kind of looked at him like, why?
Well, I thought for sure by now we would be on Mars. We'd have cities on Mars. I thought I would be going to Mars by 2001. You know, if we landed on the moon by 1969, you know, surely we should have an amusement park on the moon by now.
The moon, how long ago was the moon? I never saw any results. What did it mean? It meant zero, nothing. Landing on the moon was one of the bombs of all time. It has done nothing for any of us.
Actually, I've been very pleased that we've managed to keep on going. I thought it was going to die, and I'm happy that we've, you know, kept on at least to some level. You know, we just, you know, got them, appropriated the money to have that plane, the robot plane flying on Mars. I think that would be very good. I wish we could, you know, it'd be wonderful if we could just concentrate more on what science can and do for us, and us to work in it, to understand it, to have a dialogue in it, to speak in it.
I like NASA because I think we're too stupid as human beings, and I think one day we're going to use up this planet. So I think every cent we spend isn't enough. I would like to spend more because I like insurance, and I think that's insurance.
That's insurance for the species.
Yes.
In the future, flying may put man out of reach of the Earth. Bring on a new subspeciation, spaceman.
Those who leave the Earth, who are selected artificially and rigorously to survive the physical strains and psychological stresses of the first flights to Mars, men and women together, they will breed on Mars and produce progeny, which will inherit those qualities for which their parents were selected. And it is quite possible that in this way, by rigorous artificial selection, a new strain of humanity will develop.
One of the weird, scary things about depictions of the future, and this applies to virtually every depiction of the future, is it's all about learning to live in a world without nature. All of these worlds that they show in all the films and in the TV shows and stuff are about living in a sealed environment, looking out at a porthole at a dead world.
Today, as we face the serious problems of overpopulation and depletion of natural resources, the possibility of Mars becoming a new frontier is of increasing importance in our plans for the future. Life could be almost normal within pressurized houses and pressurized cities.
The whole idea of going to Mars or something was not around the corner. That was clear.
A spaceship using an electromagnetic drive to neutralize gravity is the obvious answer. But such a device is still a dream for the future. However, at the present time, an atomic-powered spaceship has been suggested by a leading scientist in the rocket and guided missile field, Dr. Ernst Stuhlinger, who for some years has been working closely with the rocket engineer, Dr. Werner von Braun.
I would myself go to Mars. I'd volunteer if they have cable. There's several shows I don't want to miss. You know how it is.
I was a very big fan of Lost in Space. Speaking of robots, I loved that robot. I was a big fan of Lost in Space. And, you know, the fabulous thing about that was that it wasn't so much looking, it couldn't get over the period in which it was being produced. It's such an incredibly 1960s looking thing. The hair, the clothes, the control panels, the shape of the saucer, everything about it makes it look like the 60s. I mean, the robot looks more like a coffee pot than a robot of the future, you know? And I love that.
Warning, warning, warning.
When I was a kid, I was obsessed by robots. I had all those little toy robots, you know. In fact, if I'd kept that collection, I'd have a great collection now.
It was a conceit of man that this mechanical wonder that would do all our work for us would somehow look like man. I mean, these robots were shaped like a man. They had head and arms and legs and everything. It was ridiculous.
I didn't really care about having a robot, no. Even now, I don't want one. I would really still prefer just to have a driver.
I love robots. You know, I tend to think that, of course, our answer now, you know, we have computers. Now and they're sort of like robots, except they don't clean house. You know, they don't brush my teeth. All they do is crash every other second. And I really don't, you know, it's like they do make it a little easier to function, but, you know, what I'm looking for is a robot.
One time, I was hospitalized with a psychotic manic episode, and I did see the future. And it was the Jetsons. Because they're fun, and they're like us, and that robot they had was very nice. And it just seemed like it didn't destroy them in any way. There wasn't anything ominous. It was a cartoon.
The Jetsons, of course, is the perfect example of cheesy future. Suddenly it was camp, the future. I think that was the first time it went retro.
The Jetsons lived in a bubble house. The cars were sort of bubbles. Things came out on scissor extensions and so forth, but it was very simplistic. They really were a condensation of all that future optimism that was going to happen and come true.
Little metal fingers picking you up out of bed and, you know, placing you on a conveyor belt, and by the end of it you were dressed. You know, you tilted your head back and you got coffee, and somebody teased your hair and somebody else brushed your teeth. You know, all these little mechanical hands.
As good as the Jetsons is, and the Jetsons is a fairly optimistic vision of the future, I mean, basically, it was, you know, a family of people who had, you know, nothing on their minds, and they ate little pills for dinner. What a drag. I could never understand that. I like the moving sidewalks and the briefcase that popped out and all that stuff, but a meal and a pill, no.
The 50s is the generation that most predicted the future, I think, because all collectible 50s stuff looks cheesily futuristic. That was part of the design. That was part of the complete new wave in design and architecture and everything, was this kind of this 50s future that now looks campy almost. It almost looks touching and very innocent.
The 50s didn't die till around the World's Fair in '64, and I was there. I have no interest in the World's Fair, but I was married to a movie star at the moment, and so we had to go there, you know, and so I thought, okay, I'll look at this. I think I hit a guy there. I mean, I don't hit people, but I mean, it drove me crazy, the World's Fair. I mean, I just thought it was the sickest thing I ever saw.
The New York World's Fair presents the grandest spectacle on Earth for 1964 and 1965. The International Exposition in Flushing Meadow Park. It's a spectacle as varied, as colorful, and as happy as any place in the world. The images of the fair, the places, the people, and all the happenings make for infinite impression.
When I was little, we went to that World's Fair out in the Long Island Expressway somewhere. It was like a pilgrimage to the future. Like, people were coming from all over the world to see what the future was going to be like.
I went with reverence to the World's Fair. Each thing I saw, I felt very grateful to see. I was excited to just go someplace.
There are classics in your toaster, in the blender and the clock, in the lamp and in the roaster, on the door and in the lock.
Electronic switching is almost like magic. It will bring you telephone services never before thought possible.
In a place where electronic wonders abound, a marriage of sight to the drama of sound, a wonderful coupling of vision and speech, then a ride to the future and the past within reach.
And now all are welcome on the Bell System ride.
You definitely thought that the things that you saw would come to be. You thought it was like a preview. You didn't think it was a commercial, which it largely was, And I think that probably was true of most adults, too. Not all, obviously. But, and you thought these were things that were going to happen.
A weekend, if you wish, at Hotel Atlantis in the Kingdom of the Sea. A holiday of thrills and of adventure, of radiant wonders in the sun-bright gardens of the sea.
They strapped you into these cars, and you went along this conveyor belt. And once you were on it, I felt somehow that I was imprisoned by the future at that moment. I thought well, the future seems a bit, militaristic, doesn't it?
There was only one good thing at the World's Fair. That was the African. They had some Watusis dancing, and that was hot. But the rest of it, man, it looked like it was a throwback to the 30s.
All roads lead, as they have for centuries, to the great centers of commerce and communication, as the Continental Highway now leads us to the city of tomorrow. Plazas of urban living rise over freeways. Vehicles electronically paced, travel routes remarkably safe, swift, and efficient.
The 1939 Futurama was really a vision of the future still. And everybody came with a willingness to believe it. By 1964, we weren't so sure about that anymore, and it was really just a wonderful exhibit with a lot of nostalgia to it.
By that time, progress had rather frayed edges, didn't it? And we weren't such dreamers as we were in the 20s. My own pavilion was pretty clunky from a modern point of view. It wasn't all glass. Great piers and columns and a vast technical roof and all those. There's still a lot of technology and hope for the future there, but it was wearing thin.
I don't understand people's fascination and your fascination at this project with the World's Fair in 1964. I went to it, and the thing I remember best about it was a great Spanish restaurant called the Spanish Pavilion. I mean, what kind of progress is that? We don't have that good a Spanish restaurant in New York anymore.
The displays, everything about it except for the Watusis looked like kitchen implements, It's like corkscrews and spoons, and it just looked like a bunch of bad silverware. As stupid as it looks now when you see the remnants of it, that's what it looked like then, only it was inhabited.
The World's Fair of '64 will always remain in my mind as a tremendous futuristic advance in my social life. I met a German girl there and an Austrian girl. Mwah! Elisabeth Schmidt and Dagmar Wuschko. And my life changed. Oh, there were exhibits. Oh, yeah, there was futuristic stuff, but stuff I learned from those gals. Plus, bringing a nice German girl home to my Jewish house in the Bronx. Showed her a picture of my father, Ben Klein. She showed me a picture of her father, Captain Schmidt, killed on the Russian front.
There was no need for a fair in 1964. We were still living out the dreams of the '39 fair and had some kinds of excitement in the society that, in terms of the cultural revolution, the rise of rock music, the rise of the student class, the civil rights movement, the great anti-war movement that took to the streets and came out of the colleges, all that was a kind of excitement and social upheaval that made something like the World's Fair an irrelevance.
Someday, all this will be a great city park, and many future citizens will find this heaven on a summer's day.
Well, the Unisphere still sits there, you know. It's a permanent part of Flushing Park.
It's kind of a ruin. It's a relic. And no one has the heart to tear it down, thank goodness, because it brings so much atmosphere to New York City.
It looks like the pitiful what's left of the future. And that's much more interesting to me. I think it looks really, really spectacular now. I mean, I'd like to go there now much more than then. It means that this great utopia in the future that is impossible didn't work. And I find that comforting. I don't find that depressing at all. I look back at something and I see it and it looks beautiful to me. Damaged dreams, much more interesting.
We live in a world today in which we can't say with assurance, gosh, I look forward to the future. Rather you say, I look forward to the future, comma, so long as such and such and such and such doesn't happen.
Discovery. Technology.
I think if you ask people, what makes you uneasy? One thing everybody says, of course, is technology. The telephone is wonderful until it's coming at your ears. The television is wonderful, but oh my God, I can't stand any more of it. Automobiles are great until you get run over.
Oh, cash machines. All I can think of was I'm getting cash out of a cash machine now is, where have all the tellers gone? Long time passing. You know, I hear this song. Where have all the telephone operators go? You know? I'm asking for information about a florist shop. I know the little florist shop in Sag Harbor. It's the only one on Main Street. And I'm out of town. I want to send Kathy flowers, so I'm just calling information. I say, you know the shop on Main Street, the florist shop? I just need the number at Sag Harbor. She goes, I'm in Phoenix.
I love gadgets. You know, I bought the first Palm Pilot. I was the second person to throw it across the room in frustration. I bought one of those early voice recognition software programs so that I could, you know, dictate my novel. But what I had to do is talk like this in order to be understood, period. And the as it was written out, in order to be underwear, you know, it never got it right.
You see, the future's likely to grow even better. Because what's going on right now in electronics research and development will boggle your imagination. Electronics is the fantastic way we live today. Fantastic. Good morning. Good morning. Fast cooking. What's cooking? Now, wow sound. Wow. All the time. Hello, goodbye. Breaker, breaker. It figures 2 + 2. For what you pay, ain't that neat? For the way you play, we compete. Turn it on big. Big. Get it on bright. Hi. Good night. Good night. Good sleep. Tight. Good night.
And the advantages you get from this technology replaces something that's sort of vital. And we're going to get mad. There's going to be a reaction to it because our power is taken away. As computers get more powerful, as these things get more powerful, as we have to do less for ourselves, and people, it's appealing to do less for yourself. And this will make you not have to work as hard at doing this. Well, there's an advantage to having to work as hard at doing this.
When you think about the screwdriver of the future, they have now come up with power screwdrivers. There are screwdrivers that fit into your electric drill. There are self-charging screwdrivers and so on. So we're working on the screwdriver of the future. This is an ongoing project. But the hammer of the future is not an issue. We have the hammer. It's been around since the first guy went like that. Fine. You're not going to improve on that.
Almost all things invented, in the way you're talking about actual inventions, are male. Right? And the thing about boys, which is what male means, because so few of us have ever met a man, is that when boys have things, they will use them. That no matter what the thing is, you give a boy a thing, he's going to use it. A boy will never think, maybe I shouldn't use this thing. They think, I have this thing, I'm going to use this thing. I'm going to make this thing purely so I can use the thing.
We have a tendency to predict fabulous things about the future without thinking about the future.
Now, technology has found a way to control the wild profusion of this wonder world. A jungle road is built in one continuous operation. First, a searing ray of light, the laser beam, cuts through the trees. Then a giant machine, a factory on wheels, grinds up the stumps and jungle growth, and the roadway bed is paved.
By the 1970s, people's view of the future definitely changed from what it had been back 50 years, even 20 years earlier. That the linking of technology or technological change with social progress was just something that many people had become skeptical about or were outright critical of.
So much of our problem sometimes seems to come from the fact that our technology gallops in advance of our ability socially to get along. So we wind up possibly creating global warming for ourselves because we can.
You know, I turn on my water in my building every once in a while, and it comes out black, for 30 seconds. And I go downstairs and I ask the supervisor, so, what's going on? I say, oh, no, it's nothing, it's okay. And I went, how can that be okay? You know, my dog won't drink it. I mean, there must be something wrong with this.
Did you ever think you see today a gallon of water would cost more than a gallon of gas? Now talk about technology. I mean, it's getting to the point I'm about ready to start drinking gasoline.
Nobody says stop. You know, progress always is progressive. You can't say, let's stop progress for a little while. Let's take a consensus here. Do we really want this aspect of progress to progress? But nobody gets that chance because the cigars or whoever's sitting behind the desk says, let progress progress.
Maybe there's a point at which we should call a halt, that we have too many people on Earth as it is. Maybe we ought to settle down and regroup and see if we can, say, feed the people we have, house the people that don't have housing. Perhaps that should be our goal for a while.
By observing populations of mice in different environments, Dr. Kessler hopes to foresee the possible impact on man of a crowding Earth population. For several months, Dr. Kessler allows these mice to breed and multiply, well supplied with food and water. In this overpopulated nightmare world, no mouse is safe from violent attack. Homosexuality appears. There are fewer pregnancies and many miscarriages. Harassed mothers forget their young, and finally, no baby survives at all.
You have people who are alarmists, and technology very truthfully does create its own problems, but it also creates the chance of solving the problems it creates. So it's a loop, enlarging loop kind of thing, which scares the hell out of people that aren't sophisticated enough to appreciate that the problems can be solved.
I'm not very, you may have noticed that, very contempo personality. I'm a reactionary. So I believe that no matter what the change is, it's for the worse. That's what I believe.
Technology was never regarded as connected with society. It was just something that happened out over there. But in fact, it became clear once you read the history of technology that it has enormous social consequences, that it changes the way people live, changes the way they think, changes the value system, may change family structure, may do many, many powerful things.
Future shock is a sickness which comes from too much change in too short a time. It's the feeling that nothing is permanent anymore. It's the reaction to changes that happen so fast that we can't absorb them. It's the premature arrival of the future.
We began by writing an article in 1965 called The Future as a Way of Life. In that article, we argued that we were going to have a confrontation with the future, that there would be future shock, that we were going to see a growing stress arising from a continual bombardment of changes.
The pre-cooked, pre-packaged, plastic-wrapped, instant society. We're faced with so many choices, so many decisions. And we have to make them so quickly. None of us can escape the pressures. That's what future shock is all about.
It was published in Poland in 1968, I think, during the communist...
No, 70. It was published in 70.
78.
No, honey. It was published...
76.
It was published...
75.
It seems clear that within a very few years, it will be possible to change memory processes in human beings through the use of drugs and electrical stimulation. Let's look forward to a period a number of years from now, perhaps when a person gets up in the morning and has to take the drug to bring his IQ up to the appropriate level, slap on the battery pack so that whenever he gets depressed, he can press a lever and turn on electrical stimulation, which delights him a little bit, and find then that it's not just that he can do these things, which is enough to understand, but that he does do these things.
It's absurd to think that that evolution has completed. And for all the people that are worried about additives in our food and nuclear, this, that, and the other thing, I think that the strong will survive, and there will be another mutation in the human being that can eat sawdust and chemicals. And McDonald's food or whatever, the hamburgers and the additive food of today will be the whole grains of tomorrow.
Considering present scientific knowledge, we may soon be able to create carbon copies of human beings. Imagine the implications. To duplicate a human being genetically, down to the last detail.
In the future, a couple may shop for a frozen embryo in a supermarket. The chosen embryo can be implanted in the wife's womb or in the womb of a surrogate mother who is paid to have the pregnancy for her.
If we learn how to do something, even if it's bad for us, we do it. It's the same with cloning. All the religious leaders say it's immoral, unethical. Maybe it is, but if we know how to do it, we're going to do it. Mankind has always done that, whether it's good for it or not.
By removing the nucleus from a human cell, taken, say, from the skin of your arm, and placing it in a human egg that has had its own nucleus removed, geneticists can produce an identical copy, a clone, however many you choose, 2 of each, 4, 10, or 100, all exactly like you.
If they can make a baby grow up to be the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger with the brain of Albert Einstein, we're going to do it. And who would not choose to do that? The danger, of course, is that we'll get children who look like Albert Einstein and think like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Genetic surgery can also combine this boy and his pet mouse. If scientists are able to fuse human eggs and animal eggs, man-animal hybrids could be bred. These are living man-mouse cells. As the geneticists play God, mice with opposable thumbs and men that see in the dark could issue from their test tubes.
Can you imagine what we're going to be able to do? And what we've done is we're not surprised anymore. They come up with something and you incorporate it very quickly. I mean, future shock is more now than ever before, because these inventions come and some people get incredibly happy. The non-erection people are happy about, that pill.
Maybe our fingers will get long, from working computers. Maybe the hair will fall off our heads from being, in jumpsuits. But something is going to change. The human being has got to change, because it's absurd to think that for, X million billion years we evolved, but as of 1959 we stopped.
Eventually, even the body may be discarded, leaving only the brain. Past the age of reproduction, individuals may be transformed into saucer men, timeless and indestructible. Because all experience occurs in the brain, saucer men may enjoy a rich, full life, transmitted to them by a computer tape.
I like the idea of just being a brain sitting on a pod somewhere, just taking it all in and just having other brains that you can kind of rap with.
What I keep thinking about is that there'll be 2 rooms at a university like MIT. In one room, they're designing a gene which will create a disease that could kill every living organism on the planet. Not just humans, but everything. Everything, down to the bottom of the sea, top of the mountains, humans, everything. They're working on that, kind of scientifically, thinking about it, without too much emotion. And in the next room, they've taken one little cell and they've figured out with that cell how that cell cannot age. That cell can just keep on going. You see it today, you can see it tomorrow, you can see it 10,000 years from now. It'll just still be there because they've eliminated the aging process. So you have, on one hand, the possibility for immortality, on the other hand, of eradicating the human race, right? And they're side by side.
Naive images of cities, space travel, and other wonders may fascinate us for a time, but they may also mislead. Will the frozen time traveler wake up in a very different future?
The movies that
curiously enough, Charlton Heston starred in Omega Man and Soylent Green and the Planet of the Apes movies. All these movies have the same theme, I think. There's no more space. There's no more food.
The supply of Soylent Green has been exhausted. You must evacuate the area.
The future is going to be the elite will rule. There'll be an oppressive police or a military state of some kind. The real heroes have to be pioneers and make do with what they have and be creative as though they were, you know, in the Old West.
I call them Harry Belafonte end of the world movies, you know. Anybody here? Free gas, you know, you go to the gas. It's like a Twilight Zone episode. There's no one there. It's over.
It was interesting that through that period, the late 60s and early 70s, I made 3 movies. All of these films are about a future that is not as sunlit as we like to think the future will be. Omega Man is a story, a last man on Earth story. Now, the last man on Earth fantasy is something I think every man shares. I have an idea what it would be like to be alone on the Earth, but all this vast panoply of 20th century technology would still be available to you. And when your shirt got dirty, you just drop it on the floor and go into a clothing store and put on a new one. In Soylent Green, we have a world not destroyed in war, but simply overwhelmed by humanity. It was the government that was responsible for feeding us, and they were feeding us biscuits made out of human flesh, of course. The last line in the movie, after I've been stabbed in a fight with whichever one of the bad guys it was, why, as they're dragging me off on a stretcher, I say, Soylent Green is people.
Soylent Green is made out of people.
Much louder than that.
Soylent Green is people!
The idea of Soylent Green, of the overpopulation, it was kind of an impossibility. Even the notion of when you watch it, well, if we did have that kind of overpopulation, it wouldn't work like this, you know. But the idea is that people become expendable, and that people in the world that we're living in today are expendable.
You think of Omega Man, Soylent Green, even Planet of the Apes, which was a kind of post-blast, you know, the world, everything had just really gone to hell.
Mad Max or Blade Runner or 2001 or Clockwork Orange, Planet of the Apes, it didn't look like it was going to be good.
The lone human in a civilization of apes is very intriguing. And of course, the last shot in the picture is beyond question the best closing shot in the history of film.
Oh my God. I'm back. I'm home. All the time it was... We finally really did it. You maniac! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
You know, most depictions of the future feel to me about as phony as a theme park ride. But I think one of the most evocative visions of a dystopian future is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colonies. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
I meant Blade Runner to be a small movie. You know, it was like Kafka-esque, and it only went outside kind of at the end. Then Ridley came, and after about the third day of hanging out together and talking, and, you know, excited about the whole thing. I never thought about changing much. And then he said this kind of significant thing. He said, Hampton, what's out the window?
Hmm.
That was interesting, you know.
The design for Blade Runner I had to imagine all of the contemporary trends in urban scale, social organization, economics, and I just took the Twin Towers in New York, the World Trade Center, and tripled their size to 3,000 feet, and then brought everything up in scale.
The look that it aspired to or attained was an oil refinery. This foulsome, sulfuric, cruel, hard, fiery world that's just full of fumes and residue coming down all the time on you, and rain that burns. And the poor are getting shot upon, and the rich are in their cells, you know, watching, you know, cybernetic opium shows or something, you know. I mean,
The street becomes like an alley. It becomes a collection point for generators and wiring and conduits up to these enormous structures towering overhead. So nice people never go below 60 stories. And the street becomes the city's basement.
Mostly, when you see a movie about the future, you expect to see spaceships and cleanliness and people without hair, you know. And in this case, there was so much hair.
So you have the whole city burning in a Blade Runner, you know, like just letting off these gases and burning. Well, that's kind of like the Watts riots, you know. It kind of looks the same way, and the darkness and the sadness and all these other kind of cultures that, you know, people don't really necessarily like moving in and taking over.
The future is so uncertain because there's more of it now than there ever was. The future's not simple anymore.
My view of the future is more optimistic because, in fact, we have much more going on now to solve the problems that we are confronting than we ever have had in human history. We have more people working on them, we have more money being spent on problem solving, and we have more ways of identifying what is a problem in the first place. So the loop starts closing shut much more securely than it ever has in human history. And if we don't actually solve the problems and prevent this dystopian, cathartic future from coming true, we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
What's next? The things you've seen are technically possible today. It remains only to apply what we now know to fulfill these dreams of tomorrow. The world of 1999 and beyond is limited only by the boundaries of our imagination today.
I think the great lesson of the 20th century is that our love affair with technology is in constant conflict with our humanity. And the fact that we are beginning to understand that, I think, is a good thing at the end of the century.
There is no anti-gravity. There's no instant translation devices. There's no matter transporters. Jetpacks burn your ass.
You can't think about the future if you take human nature into account, because human nature doesn't change. Human nature has no future. The future of human nature is the past.
Who would want to know the future? I never understand that. I never read astrology columns. Usually they're badly written. But secondly, who would want to know when you're going to die or what's going to happen?
maybe we'll kind of like figure it out and get kind of wiser, and then maybe even, you know, a million years from now, whatever, we'll be wise. We'll be like some smart people, or maybe just senile.
You can find optimists and pessimists in each era, and they're each equally wrong.
Life is not all great, and life is not all terrible, and we're not going to have a utopia, but we're also not going to have a dystopia in all likelihood.